Hi, I'm Jamie Dahl with Central State University Extension.
And I'm Dave Apsley with Ohio State University Extension.
And we're here kind of continuing our little oak story for Tree Talk, and we're going to transition here into talking about some oak-friendly solutions that are available to private landowners and others to focus on your property if you have suitable places for growing oak.
So the normal occurrence on private lands in Ohio is that folks own woodlands, and there are really a couple extremes of the way they manage it. One, they don't do a whole lot of anything, and if we just leave our woods alone, eventually it's probably going to convert to maple. If we also don't do anything, we may have invasive species to become a big problem as well. And then on the other extreme, if you do a harvest and you really haven't planned it through and you just allow someone to harvest and take what's of value, a lot of times that doesn't favor oak either. So if you leave it alone or you harvest heavily and don't think about oak management, either case you get about the same thing. You're not getting oak, we're converting to maple. So what we're going to talk about now with the first slide is some of the things that we can do actively to keep oak around. So we're going to talk a little bit about oak regeneration harvest and some of those practices we can do to improve oak.
So Dave, can we just back up for a minute and talk about this regeneration concept? Because I think that's something in forestry that we say that, but what we're talking about really is what's going on in the understory, the smaller trees. Kind of one way to think about it is if you look down below your knees, what are we seeing or not seeing on the forest floor?
Yeah, so what we're finding more and more, as a forester, I was trained to look at the trees and measure and all that, but what we're finding is, what's going to happen after a timber harvest, for instance, or what's going to happen in the future, we can tell a lot by what's already on the ground. So, we're going to talk about some of the management practices that we can do to encourage oak, but we really need to start paying attention to what's on the forest floor. If we don't have young oak seedlings on the forest floor and we have a disturbance, we're not going to get oak back. So that's kind of a shift in the way we're thinking about things. Very logical, it makes sense. It's just something that's kind of changing the way we're looking at it. And that's why we're training foresters with some of the training we're doing too.
Right, and what we see is, of course, there's all these factors that contribute to what we're seeing on the forest floor. So if you are seeing some oak, wonderful, but how old are those oak, and are they able to continue to succeed, or is the canopy so closed in and they have so much other competition that they're not gonna be able to do that? Or if you don't have oak, is there a possibility that you're gonna get oak, but if you don't have a good overstory component, or you don't have good opportunity for acorns, then it's going to be hard to establish that. And then looking at what other components are there. Is there maple there? Are there invasives there? It's complicated.
It does get complicated, and that's where you're really getting a trained professional forester to help you. But if folks are going to do a harvest, they really need to, we've talked in the past about what normally happens. Normally a landowner just has someone cut the trees that they can make money on, but really it's more like a prescription when you talk about an illness or whatever. So if we go back to the slides, we'll talk a little about some oak regeneration harvest. And the classic harvest that happens in Ohio, a single tree taking out a few trees out of the canopy, especially if those trees are the oaks that are producing the acorns, you can see it's not good for the oaks. We're still too shady. The maples and other species like maple and black gum are going to take over.
And that isn't another term that a logger sometimes throws out, or we hear the term selection, which may be kind of
or just
used
a select cut.
Yeah, used it. That's a tricky term that could mean a lot of different things.
Yeah. We always kind of joke is a lot of people say we're only going to select cut, and they say, well, is that good or bad? And I said, well, it depends on who's doing the selecting and why.
Yeah, and I think a good way, I've heard some foresters describe it as, I really like this, is to think about, instead of thinking about what it is that we're cutting and taking, you should be thinking about what is it that we are intentionally leaving.
What we're leaving, and then what's on that understory floor again. And then on the other extreme, if you go back to the slide, clear cuts favor other species. So if the oak's not there and we clear cut, we don't have young oaks there that are competitive, that have the big large taproot, so that when the light hits the forest floor, the oaks aren't going to win either. So then it's going to be yellow poplar or aspen or cherry, things like that. So we could convert it the other way too.
And I think we should give the caveat, right, Dave, that a lot of this is when Dave and I are saying this, a lot of this is typically, but we want you all to consult with a service forester, state service forester, to help you figure some of this out on your own property, because it depends. It doesn't mean that some of these things, you might have your own kind of adjustments to these kind of broad statements that we have, because it really depends what's going on specifically on your property.
Yeah, and every property is different. Even on a given property, there's variation. The ideal harvest typically that really can favor oak is what we call a shelter wood. And that's where we're taking a part of the canopy off, maybe half of it, but what we're leaving is the oaks. And those oaks are there to produce the acorns for the young oak seedlings to get started. And we're producing that middle light level. We've talked about Goldilocks before, but that's that light level where the oaks can put a lot of energy into the roots. But we also got to think about that interfering vegetation, that other mid-story of shade that can develop. Historically, fire kept that mid-story down, and there's an image there of some prescribed fire that's going on. The bottom image of the green is all that lower layer there is oak, and it's because that site had been burned repeatedly. The light levels are a little bit higher, and it's been burned repeatedly, and those oak seedlings with those big roots can get really well established and be very competitive and do quite well.
And maybe this is a good time to mention, again, if you consult with a professional, they can help you figure out the options with herbicide. And we are trying to work on some more options for private landowners with fire. In particular, if you are at a property where you are near state or federal land, there may actually be some opportunities for you to do a prescribed burn. So that's something to ask your local professionals about.
Yeah, so there's multiple options. We're looking at some research on herbicides that can mimic fire, where we're targeting those mid-story plants and favoring the oaks. Fire is a tool. So there's lots of work that needs to be done yet. And we're continuing to research. We're continuing to look at sites and different activities to see what's really going to favor oak. But we know that the way we're doing business right now is not. So we're really looking at these options and hopefully make some of these tools available and provide some resources for those landowners to get it done. So with that,
I think
look forward to another segment on oak and how we can improve it.